Well, today we have a very special guest who, like many of us, had to learn the lesson of Proverbs 14:12 the hard way. And he's here to talk about it. Let's welcome Clint Littlejim to the Secret Church today. Well, first of all, Clint, we want to say thanks for coming down and doing this. You guys live up in Del City or in that area?
Well, actually, we live out in Little Axe.
Oh, you guys still live out there?
Teach and coach in Del City, and so at Christian Heritage Academy. So I appreciate you having me.
He's related to the Little Axes and cousins or something like that of some of the people in our church. But actually, I read a story about Clint in the Oklahoman. In 2009 was the story was in there. And I kept that paper, and I said, someday I want to get this guy to our church, and I want everybody in our church to hear his story because I think it's got a lot of important lessons for us. So why don't you just tell us about where you grew up, your family growing up, what that was like.
I grew up in a community called Little Axe, just east of here, probably 15 miles, and was raised in a good family. My parents tried to teach me right and wrong. I had a grandmother who had become a Christian and was a vital part of my life. She was constantly teaching me about God's Word, and although we didn't go to church as a family, still had some pretty good values, and some good morals. They didn't want me to lie, steal, and cheat and things like that, and so most people don't want their kids to do that. So. But it was a good family, and they taught me right and wrong. And again, my grandmother really was the starting point of Christians in our family, and she really kind of changed the course of our life. It just we became a Christian. There was more, my dad got saved, my uncle got, and it just was kind of a trickle-down effect. My grandfather got saved before that, and so it's just God's done a lot of good things in my family's life. So it was a good family. We love athletics, always been athletic, and so that's kind of how our family's been.
Everybody remember that. One person in a family, a grandparent or anybody else, can make a big difference. Now, you grew up out there, and Little Axe at that time went through the 9th grade, and then after that, kids went to schools, around, and you decided to go to Norman High, and you were starting quarterback, you were star pitcher, and how was that experience? I mean, you said, athletics have always been important to you. How was that going through high school, being able to kind of enjoy those achievements?
Well, it was good. All my life I've loved athletics. As long as I can remember, as far back as T-ball, when I first started competing, I loved athletics. And one of the things that gave me a desire to go to Norman, because at Little Axe we only went to the 9th grade, and some of the kids there, we weren't really in a district. They went to Harrah, they went to Tecumseh, they went to Noble, they went to Norman. They just went to different schools because we didn't have a high school. And one of the things reason I wanted to come to Norman was because they were a big school, and I wanted to see if I could compete at the highest level. And to me, at that time, a 5A school, they didn't have 6A, would have been the highest level of competition. So athletics was important to me, and so that's really probably the deciding factor why I went to Norman.
We have a couple of pictures that our crack research staff has dug up. There's a guy, he's got his Little Axe cap on there. Go back a couple, Tina. There he is on the baseball team. And then Tina put the little arrows on there so we can see exactly where he is, number 4 on the football team. Now, when kids are in high school or in college, quite a few end up experimenting with drinking and or drugs at some point along there. And what was it, at what age were you, and sort of what were the factors that caused you to experiment with drinking and or drugs?
Well, my family, at the time when I was growing up, my grandfather was the only one that drank alcohol. Nobody else in my family did. And so, but when I got to Norman, when I left Little Axe after my freshman year and I went to Norman, I realized that even though I didn't drink back then, that it seemed like everybody was doing it. And I always considered myself an athlete. I always thought drugs and alcohol were something that people who were not athletics and didn't have anything going on in their life, I thought that's what they did, you know. Well, when I got to Norman, I figured out that even the better athletes, that's what they're doing. They're partying on the weekends, they're drinking, some of them are doing drugs. And so, you know, when I left Little Lacs and went to Norman, I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be accepted because I didn't know anybody. I went from a school of being what I always called top of the food chain, you know, because I was an athlete
Yeah.
to now there's a lot of people who have the same ability as I do, or maybe some better. And so I quickly tried to fit in, and one of the ways I tried to fit in was by drinking and by partying with everybody else. And so I didn't want to seem odd. I didn't want to seem, I just wanted to fit in. And so that was what I had to do in order to fit in.
I think that's a story for a lot of people. They later end up regretting the decision to do that, you know. But I think that's true for a lot of people. Well, tell us what happened in the hours leading up to the event where you had a car accident out on Highway 9 back on, what was it, October 18th, 1986. What happened in the hours leading up to that?
Well, I was playing baseball at Seminole. It was Seminole Junior College now, or then. It was Seminole State then. And I had a friend who I played with there. His name was Justin Kinsler, and he had graduated from Edmond High School. And back then there was just Norman and there was just Edmond. Mm-hmm. There wasn't Edmond North and Edmond Santa Fe and Norman North. It was just one school. And so our schools were playing that Friday night. And so after we got done with practice, we had planned on going and watching Edmond and Norman play at Norman. And so we decided on the way that we were going to buy some beer, and we were going to drink till we got there, and then we were going to watch the game, and we were going to come home. And it was in the fall, and we were supposed to leave at 6 o'clock in the morning to go to University of Arkansas and play in the fall. And back then, junior colleges could play Division I schools in the fall, and so we were supposed to leave and go play Arkansas on Saturday. And so anyway, we head to Norman, we're drinking. Well, when we get to Norman, we come through campus to go to Norman High School, and we notice there's a huge party going on, and it was OSU, I believe it was Bedlam the next day. I believe it was OSU was the next day on Saturday. And so we seen all these people in front of what was called O'Connell's then. It was I think there's a dormitory there now.
Yeah.
And so we pulled in there, and we started drinking some more. We went out and bought another 12-pack and drank that, and then we stayed at O'Connell's, and he met some friends that he went to Edmond with, and I'd met some friends that I went to Norman with, and we just started drinking, and we just kept drinking, and we never made it to the high school football game. We just we just thought we were having a good time. That's what we thought we were doing. And so anyway, do you want me to keep going all the way?
You know, then you
I can go forever.
Yeah,
you know?
you left there then, and were you heading home when this accident happened, or were you heading back this way? You were heading back out that way, right?
We had a curfew that night. Our baseball coach told us we had to be in by 11 because we were leaving at 6 in the morning. And so I told my friend about 10 o'clock. It was already getting close to where we might not make it back. I said, man, let's go. I said, let's get out of here. We got to get up early, you know. And he said, oh, man, I just met so-and-so. Just stay a little bit longer. And so I said, reluctantly, I said, okay, you know, because even though I partied, athletics was really important to me at the time. And so I wanted to get back. And so anyway, he said, no, well, we stayed there a little bit longer. And finally I come back to him again. I'm a little upset now. I said, hey, let's go. Justin, let's go, man. And he said, oh, just a little bit. I said, well, give me your keys. I'm going to go start the car because it was kind of cool that night. I said, and I'm going to warm it up and you come on. He said, all right. So he gave me his keys. And I guess by this time I had drank so much that I'm not thinking real clear right now. And so, I mean, we split a 12-pack on the way to Norman. We bought another 12-pack, and then we drank for 2-3 hours there at O'Connell's. And so there's no telling how much alcohol I had in me. And but anyway, I went out and started his car, and I sit there, and I waited probably 15 minutes, and he didn't come. So I just got mad. I said, oh, I'm going. I'm leaving him. And we were in his car, too. It wasn't my car. We were in his car. So I just remember pulling out, and I remember getting on Highway 9 from there by Lloyd Noble is where I got on, and started heading east back to, I was going to Seminole, you know, that's off Highway 9. And so but I guess, you know, I was just getting, the alcohol was having more and more of effect, and I really only remember a couple things once I got on the road. I remember getting out as I'm leaving Norman, and I do remember passing a car, and that's until when I passed the car, the next thing I remember is swerving, and then that's all I remember until the police officer woke me up with a flashlight in the vehicle.
We have a couple of pictures of, that's your car there, and then I think we have one more picture of your car, and then somebody took a picture of kind of the whole accident there, and this obviously you can see the sun coming up there, so that must have been, you know, 6 or 7 the next day when they took that. So immediately following the accident, you kind of woke up. There's a police officer there. Then what happened?
Well, you know, the police officer's shining. I'm in a lot of pain. My legs are up under the engine's kind of in my lap, and I'm just in a lot of pain all over. And I just remember he's shining a light in my face, and I can hear him talking on the radio, and I can hear him saying that there's an accident, and it's alcohol related. And I can remember him shining a light in my face and saying, listen, you got to stay awake. You got to stay awake. Stay with me. Stay with me. And so I'm really in a lot of pain, and I'm thinking there as I can remember somewhere. I had always heard for some reason, and maybe it's true, maybe it's not. I'd heard if you're really hurt bad, don't go to sleep. And so I'm trying real hard to stay awake, and he just keeps shining that light on me. Stay with me. Stay with me. And so I'm trying, but I'm noticing too that every time I'm awake, I'm in this intense pain, and then as I close my eyes and start to drift off, the pain just starts to go away easily. And I was scared then. I had gotten saved when I was 16 years old. I got saved at Hilltop Baptist Church. I remember realizing for the first time in my life that Easter Sunday service that I was separated from God, and that I needed to have my sins forgiven, and I accepted Christ that Sunday. And while I'm in this wreck, I'm thinking I'm not real secure in my salvation at the time, and I remember thinking to myself, if I die, I wonder if I'm going to hell or not, because I'm a Christian and I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing. And so in my mind, there's this battle and this war going on, thinking, if I die, am I going to go to hell? I shouldn't have been doing what I'm doing, you know. So there's a lot of things that are going on in my mind as I'm in all this pain, and so just a little bit of what I was dealing with.
So you had some broken ribs, and what other injuries?
I
did you
had
have?
6 ribs that were broke. I had a collapsed lung. I had a broke leg. I had my nose was shattered, and in fact, the doctor told me afterwards. The surgeon, or no, maybe it's the doctor, he said the steering wheel's what hit my nose, and he said if the steering wheel would have, it hit me this way and it peeled my nose back, and he said that if it would have been 1/4 of an inch lower, it would have driven this bone into my skull, and it would have killed me instantly, he said. So even in that, I saw that later as, for whatever reason, you know, sometimes we don't understand why God spares us when we're at fault, but God did that for me, and it's because He had a purpose for my life later on. And so, but anyway, that was my injuries.
So after that, were you taken immediately to the hospital, to the police station? Did your parents show up, or what
Yes.
kind of happened next?
I was in the hospital, and I can remember waking up. I guess I went to sleep in the car, and I guess I was transported to Norman Regional, and I can remember waking up still in a lot of pain, and all these doctors are around me, and I can remember my dad coming in, and my dad comes there, and he says, Clint, I'm here. He said, just, you know, hang in there. And so they're working on me, and you know, probably this was one of the most difficult things up until this point is I can remember, I don't know who it was, somebody in the room telling my dad, said, "Mr. Little Jim, do you know that there's a fatality involved in this accident?" And immediately I just started crying. I just started uncontrollably crying because I knew that the wreck that I was in, that someone was killed. And I knew it wasn't me, and I was by myself. And so I knew it had to be somebody that either I'd run into or I didn't remember anything. And so I just knew that it was, I just started crying. I was crying really because of my dad. And I knew, it's just this instant knowledge of how much pain they must be going through because of what I've done. And so it was a terrible moment.
So you're 19 years old, and you go from just having a successful life, high school, everything's great. Now you're playing ball in college, and suddenly you go from this 19-year-old to facing first-degree manslaughter, and you could wind up in prison for a very long time. When that reality began to set in, that somebody had died and that you're facing this situation, what went through your mind? You know, how did you deal with that? Or
Well, you know, I tell you the instant that it really hit me. You know, we got a lawyer. We tried to get the best lawyer in Norman. Her name was Richard Talley, and we had heard he was really good in these cases. And so I think that I really felt like that I was scared. I didn't want to go to jail was the main thing. I felt so much guilt for what I'd done to the other family, what I'd done, put my family through, that there was this enormous amount of guilt. But I can remember this distinct night that really changed my life. I was just hoping to not go to jail. I'd heard all the horror stories about what goes on in jail, and I was afraid. But I remember the night or the day before, our lawyer calls and says, "I need to meet with y'all about 7 o'clock at night." So the next night, and so we go there, and we get there, and as soon as I walk in the door, I can look on his face, and I can tell something's not right. You know, he's not smiling and the normal person that he is. And so we walk in there, and he just says, "I just want you to know that I can't do miracles." And he says, "I just want you to know, here's the evidence. Your blood alcohol level was over 2.0. You went around past somebody and stayed in the left-hand lane for, I think it was over 2 miles. You were going 75 or 80 miles an hour on the interstate, and you hit this truck head on." And he said, "I just want you to know I don't think we can win this case." He said, we can fight it however you want to fight it." He said, "We can plead innocent." And at that time, we knew we weren't going to plead innocent because I knew I wasn't innocent. And I thought we knew that would be wrong. And so, he said, we can plead innocent, we can fight it. He said, "We'll lose." He said, "And then we'll appeal it." And he said, "We'll lose and we'll appeal it." He said, "And eventually you're going to end up going to jail." He said, "There won't be anything we can do about it." He said, "Or the other thing we can do is we can plead guilty. We can just throw ourselves on the mercy of the court and just see what happens." And then after he said that, he said, "And I just want you to know this is a felony. This is a federal offense." He said, "You won't be able to teach at schools. You won't be able to work for the state. You won't be able to work for the government. You won't be able to vote no more. You won't be able to have a firearm." And he just started rattling off this list of all the things all the privileges that I would lose because I'd have a felony on my record. And so I just sit there and I'm just sinking. And so after he says that, we tell him, "Well, we're going to plead guilty because I am guilty." And so I remember getting in the car, and it was a cool, drizzly, rainy night. And I remember sitting in the back seat, and I can remember I felt like I had no hope. And I felt like the weather was just rain. I wasn't bawling. But the tears were just coming out of my eyes. It was just uncontrollable. I just couldn't stop them. But I wasn't boo-hoo-hoo, or anything. The tears just kept coming down. And I remember my mom looking back at me, and she said, "Clint, you're just going to have to trust the Lord now." And And when she said that, I knew there wasn't anything else I could do. That's what I had to do. My lawyer wasn't going to be able to help me. There was nothing, my being a good person before that wasn't going to be, nothing was going to help me. And so I went to the house that night, and I laid in bed, and this is what changed my life. I looked up at the ceiling, and I started praying. I said, Lord, I said, I know what I've done is wrong. I've sinned against other people. I said, but mostly I've sinned against you. And I said, from this day forward, I just want to surrender my life to you. And Jesus, I'll just make you my Lord. And I just told the Lord that night that I would do whatever he wanted me to do. I would go wherever he wanted me to go, and I would tell people about him while I was doing it. And I can remember that night, just the peace of God. They talk about the peace of God which surpasses all understanding. I experienced that night, because prior to that, I was just full of anxiety. I was full of fear. I just was full of guilt because of what I'd done. I mean, a beer commercial would come on TV, and my heart would just immediately start pounding. I'd go down the road, and I'd see a can of beer on the side of the road, and my heart was I was just constantly in turmoil because I was full of anxiety. And everything, I had a hard time riding in a vehicle with somebody else because I always felt like, what if they go in a ditch? And I was just scared to death until that night. And whenever I surrendered my life to the Lord, when I made Jesus the Lord of my life that night, it changed me. I got peace, and God began to just move and do things in my life that was unbelievable at that time.
So you said you were saved when you were 16, and then something different happened when you were 19.
Yeah.
It kind of went from here to the different level or whatever because of the circumstances, and I think that's probably a lot of us here can relate to that. Now, was there an actual trial, or was there just a sentencing because you had pled guilty?
Well, it didn't go to an actual trial. We pled guilty, and then once you plead guilty, then really there was no jury in this case. It's just the judge had to make he had to give me a judgment on what he was going to do. And so we just basically threw ourselves on the mercy of the court. The evidence was overwhelming. I was guilty. There was, and so the first time we go and you plead, and then you come back at a later date, and then the judge gives you the verdict of what.
I read in the paper that they said the sentencing guidelines at that time for a first offense situation like this were from 5 to 20 years in prison, federal prison. So what happened on the day you went in for the actual sentencing? You're going to hear your fate. What happened that day?
Like I said, after I went in there, it was, I believe it was in June. But we went there and went before the court, and I can remember this just like it was yesterday, because it made a profound, difference in my life to let me know that God is a God that can do anything, that he can cause all things to work together for good to those who love him, to those who are called according to his purpose. Romans 8:20, he can do amazing things when someone will give their life to him. And so we go to the court, and the judge asks my lawyer, do you have any closing comments before I render judgment? And he says no. And then he asks the district attorney, do you have any closing comments before I render judgment? And the district attorney said, yes, Your Honor, he does. And so this is the part that was amazing to me, is that the district attorney said, yes, Your Honor, Mr. Kearns. Now, J.J. Kearns was the husband of the woman that I killed in the car accident. He had asked the district attorney to not send me to jail. And so when the district attorney said that, it was mind-boggling, because here I had killed his wife, they had kids, and yet he's asking the district attorney not to send me to jail.
Did you know that he was going to do that before that day? You didn't know until you were right
my
there.
lawyer didn't either. My lawyer turned and looked at me. But I really believe that God changed I don't know if he changed his heart. He laid on his heart to do that. And the reason I believe, one of in Proverbs, it talks about the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord. and he turns it like rivers of water. He turns it whichever direction he desires. You know, in this case, it would seem like there's no way that this guy would let the killer of his wife go free. That's not logical. That's not something that someone would say, yeah, I could see where it, because this guy's a good guy. No, I mean, God, for whatever reason, and because he had purposes for my life as well, he laid on his heart to say that to the district attorney. And the judge, then he gives me 5 years, a suspended sentence. But before I left, this is what the judge told me. He said, Mr. Little Jim, I just want you to know that if Mr. Kearns had not asked me not to send you to jail, I would have had no choice but to send you to jail.
And J.J. Kearns is going to be here next Sunday and kind of give his story on how he was able to deal with that and have such a heart of grace. And I think that's going to be really, because a lot of people have been hurt in life in different ways, in really severe ways, and maybe ways that aren't near that severe. And we have a hard time forgiving people. We have a hard time getting over it. You know, we have a hard time not building resentment and bitterness, where sometimes it's warranted. You know, bitterness and resentment is warranted. But it's going to be interesting to hear him talk about that. And so this event that happened when you were 19 years old. Since then, you've been married. You've got four kids. 3 of them here with us today, and your wife. And you're a teacher in a Christian school, and you have, unlike some people who make a foxhole conversion, you know, or a jailhouse conversion, and it's not legit, yours was obviously legitimate because your life has proven that in the time since then. So, you know, how would you try to best describe what happened when you were 19 years old, and then now 20-something years later, it has still been the kind of the dominant force to rule the direction of your life? I mean, how would you describe that, or what do you attribute that to?
Well, you know, like I said, when I laid in my bed that one night and I surrendered my life to the Lord, I meant this. You know, it's like I shared earlier. I got saved when I was 16. I think a lot of times people, you know, when the Holy Spirit convicts them, they realize they're a sinner. You know, when they compare themselves to God's Word, they realize that they're a sinner and they're separated from God. And so a lot of people, like I did, they get saved. Okay, they walk down the aisle and they repent of their sin, and but after all they do that, I think one of the things like I made a mistake in is I didn't understand what it meant to give Jesus lordship. Lordship is a different deal. It's when you voluntarily say, Lord Jesus, I give you my life for you to do whatever you want to do with it. Sometimes we just get, like I did, get saved, and you obviously understand you're a sinner, you're separated from God, and you need His forgiveness, and you get that, but then we just go on and we just live normal lives, and we still make mistakes, we still do things that we shouldn't do, but whenever I surrendered my life to Him, what I did is I said, Lord Jesus, you be Lord of my life. I'll go wherever you want me to go. I'll do whatever you want me to do, and I'll tell people why you're doing it. That's the part that changed my life in this whole thing. God has sent me to a Christian school, been to 2 of them now, been to this last one, Christian Heritage, for 14 years. It's because that's where He wants me to be. God decided, I want you to teach at this Christian school. I want your kids to go to this Christian school. You know, my wife and my kids are a testimony of God's goodness. If I'd have went to jail, I probably wouldn't have met my wife, wouldn't have these kids that I have right now. And so I would just say, for me, the different, God has been the difference, but He's been the difference because I surrendered to Him, that He could have the preeminence or the lead in my life. He could do whatever He wanted to do with it. I no longer have the right to just do what I want to do. Some people live that way. Some people just think, okay, I can do whatever I want to do, but I don't feel that way, and I don't want to feel that way. I want God to lead my life. I want Him to direct me. And every job and everything that I've ever done, I've always felt like God either opened that door or God's closed that door, that He's been the direction of my life. And I'm telling you, it's a great life. It's a great life for God to lead your life, to direct your steps. And so it's been an amazing life for me. I wouldn't trade it for anything. Now, after the fact, I don't understand. I have a hard time understanding why people would want to live without the Lord, to be honest with you. So,
Yeah. What would you say to anybody here who has done something in their past that was either very intentional, like yours wasn't really intentional, there was just, you intentionally drank, and then there was this unintentional consequence. Sometimes we do things intentionally and do really terrible things. We'd be ashamed to ever sit up here in front of a group of people and talk about like you're willing to do. Sometimes we don't really kind of mean to do it, but we wind up doing something that it really hurts a lot of people or really grieves the heart of God or whatever. And we have a hard time then forgiving ourselves or feeling like I'll never be okay again. I'll never be a complete person. I'll never be able to go on with my life without this dark cloud hanging out. What would you say to people here? Because all of us have to some degree or another, some really, really horrible things and some maybe not so bad, but we've all have things in our past that we're ashamed of and we wish we'd never done. Maybe we find a hard time forgiving ourselves. What would you say to them from your experience?
I would say if the individual is saved, if they've genuinely repented of their sin, I would say to that person, you need to surrender your life to the Lord. And this is why I'd say that. Because when you surrender your life to the Lord, when you let God have free reign of your life, when you let Him decide what you're going to do and what you're not going to do, when you do that, God comes on your side and He begins to do things that you can't imagine. I mean, you know, that was an unbelievable thing that Mr. Kearns did. But I want to tell you a quick story of what else he did. A month later, I get this letter in the mail saying that I'm being sued for $3.2 million. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, well, no wonder they didn't want to send me to jail. They want to get money from me, you know. And I said that to my mom. And, you know, my mom told me, she kind of scolded me. She said, Clint, after all God's done for you, and you're not going to trust God. And I said, you're right. You're exactly right. And so, but anyway, it goes to court. We get to the time when the judge, my lawyer tells me, he said, you know, this is typical. They're not going to get $3.2 million, but it's conceivable they could get half of that. They could get $1.6 million. He said, this is what they're going to do. They're going to garnish your wages until that's paid up. It could be for the rest of your life,
Yeah.
you know, all this. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, how am I going to have a family? How can I support a family if half of my wages are gone every month? And, you know, but because I surrendered my life, I believe that God just came on my behalf and He began to move and begin to do things that were unbelievable. And we get to the sentencing, and the district attorney, the judge does the same thing, asks the district attorney, or the attorney for the Kearns family actually, said, is there any closing comments? And their lawyer said, yeah, the Kearns family has just said that the $100,000 that your insurance is going to pay will be fine. So it didn't cost me a dime. That is a God thing. And I could tell you story after story after story of God doing unbelievable things in my life, and I believe it is a result of me surrendering myself to Him and saying, you be the Lord of my life. I don't want to be the Lord. If you're the Lord of your life, you're going to continue to have difficulty. We're all going to have difficulties, but you're going to continue to feel like there's no hope. You're going to continue to feel, I'm never going to be able to get past this guilt that I feel. I'm never going to be able to get past the pain. I'm never going to be able to get past the circumstances. You're going to always feel that way until you surrender your life to the Lord. And when you surrender your life to the Lord, He will come on your behalf, and He will begin to move and begin to do things that you cannot imagine. And so, just like my family is a perfect example of that. I have a wife and 4 kids now that were unimaginable at the time if I would have really gotten or received what I deserved. I didn't get what I deserved, but that's what grace is. It's unmerited favor. It's God's mercy. I didn't receive what I deserved, and that was God's choosing. I would have chosen that, but God chose that for me. And so that's what God will
Things
do.
are, you know, completely outside of your control,
That's
which
right.
they were. That's when you have to just say, you know, ultimately, God is sovereign, and ultimately, you know, God can, and even in the worst of things, He can
Right.
still make some good come out of it. in our lives. You know, all of us have to remember sometimes that we have the God of the second chance, you know, and the third chance and the fourth chance. And I think what J.J. Kearns did was a demonstration of God's grace, you know, to someone you admit doesn't deserve it. We don't deserve God's forgiveness or grace. It's just what He chooses to do. It's what He chooses to bestow upon us where we don't deserve it, but we get it anyway. And that's what God's grace is all about. Well, let's hear it for Clint. Thanks again for coming up today, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.